Hello everybody and welcome to another video. So recently, Ant on his new channel, HR, which I'll link below his original video, he made a video said, Age of Sigmar, what's the point? And he didn't mean it in a derisive way. And he was just legitimately asking a question and had sort of went through some reasonable points. And at the end, he sort of said, this is my challenge I'm throwing out. Please tell me what the point is. What's, the point of the game? And I thought, okay, cool, I'll take that challenge. Because I do greatly enjoy the game, and I want to help other people enjoy it. Now, let me also say, right away, top of this video, it's not the only game I enjoy. I also play Ninth Age, and I also play Mordheim, and I also play Malifaux, and I like all of those games. All for different reasons. If you don't like Age of Sigmar, cool, no issue. You can disagree with everything I say in this video, and I'm perfectly fine with it. What I mean by all of these things is, all these points I'm going to make is, this is how I perceive them, and what I find fun, or where I find the game fails. And I'm going to talk about both. What it's good at, and what it's not good at. So, that's kind of what I'm going to do. I'm going to try to give just sort of from my humble opinion, where the game succeeds and where the game fails, and what the whole point of the thing is. So let's get into it. Alright, so let's start out with what does Age of Sigmar do well? And I'm going to start out by saying I think it has a good learning curve. And by that I simply mean you can teach this game to people very quickly. The rules being as small as they are, you can actually you can just eschew the book, and you can pretty much just tell them while playing. Now, I have tried this with previous editions of Warhammer, and in general, it didn't work. I'm not going to say it never worked. Certainly there were some people who were willing to barrel through and learn. But a lot of people who, maybe even people who had an interest in it, because we played Mordheim together for a while. I had a large group of people who I started up a Mordheim League with, and I said, well, do you want to try normal Warhammer? They said, sure. So they even already had the foundational principles of the game. And when they looked at it, they were just like, it's too much. I don't care to learn all this. It's not really the case with AOS. It's fast, and you can get people into it. I showed those same people AOS. They got it. We played some. There you go. Now, this is a very personal thing. How quick you travel up and down a learning curve is incredibly unique and individualistic. And so you might look at a game at the more complex end of the spectrum, something like Ninth Age, and say, well, I actually find that very straightforward and simple. And if that's the case, that's awesome. Like, cool. I have no issue with that. But from a design perspective, it is a complex game. Okay? That's not a bad thing. I'm not using that as a derisive term. Some games should be complex and have a deep well of rules and situations to explore. That's valid. But it does make it a harder learning curve. Okay. So one of the points Ant made in his video was it's sort of this stealthy complexity because you need to know all the war scrolls. I would push back on that and say the addition of a bunch of war scrolls does make the game complex. And if you try to go from zero to competitive play right away, yeah, then you need to learn a bunch of stuff in the same way you needed to learn a bunch of old armies. But you don't need to know that to play the game, wherein you really only need to know the base rules and maybe a couple, 2, 3 war scrolls, because you can get going on that. I mean, realistically, of course, you can get going on 1 war scroll. And of course, a small number of figs plays fine. Again, very easy for the learning curve. I can start with a very small number of figs and still play a very real version of the game. So I think that's one of the things where the game succeeds and does well. Alright, I would also say that another success is verisimilitude. I have pictures of bears on horses here because when I searched for an image for the word verisimilitude, this came up. And I thought that's the funniest thing I've ever seen. It's bears riding horses. I don't even know what's going on there. But anyways, what's verisimilitude? It's sort of a sense of truth, right? That what you're reading has a sense of truth to it. And this is generally interpreted in RPGs, card games, war games, that models or characters or the cards you play act as you would imagine they do based on their description and the world they inhabit. I'll make this very real. If someone is described as being like if you're reading the description of something, a character or something, and they're like the greatest swordsman in the world, right, or something nonsensical like that, and then you read their rules and they're like they have like +1 to hit over every other thing that swings a sword in the game, you don't really feel like that's a failure of verisimilitude, right? And verisimilitude is generally the first thing that dies to balance. So this is going to tie into a failure later, don't worry. Because I agree with several points Ant makes as well. But because the reality is, in the sort of sense of the real world, there is often imbalance and difference, and especially in these fantasy worlds, that is to say, because it's not about matching to the real world, it's about matching to the reality of the world that these things inhabit, right? So in an RPG, if you have a sci-fi game where people have went out and explored and settled the galaxy, then like the verisimilitude is you should be able to, you know, travel faster than light and jump around or something like that, and have neat, fun power armor and be able to survive in space wearing a suit and stuff like that, right? It all makes the world feel real. And I think that Age of Sigmar succeeds in this regard because the War Scrolls have a lot of unique abilities and a lot of individual flavor, right? And in addition, things that are big can actually go big. Like, the big things in AOS are big, you know? They're definitely not, they're definitely not just, like, slightly tougher or with a few wounds or something like that. They feel massive. Things like Archaon or Nagash feel just so much beyond the normal halberdier of the world, right? And that sort of creates a natural reality to the way the story of the world is told. And I think that's valuable because it creates this sort of, to me, again, remember, all of this is my perceptions of it. It creates a more immersive experience. Again, as with everything I'm going to talk about for success and failure, it's very personal. Because to you, that might not either be important, or you might find that other things match just fine. And that's fine. People have different tolerances for this. Alright, scenarios and objectives. And of course, you'll see my image here is of the greatest scenario ever made for an MMO of all time, bar none, Nordenwatch. That's the only part of this video that is an opinion. That is the greatest scenario in the history of mankind. Now, back to the actual thing we're talking about. Because the base rules are very simple and lightweight, you just can layer on these additional items like scenarios, objectives, complexity, special rules for like the time of war stuff, for your realm, for terrain. All that stuff layers on because if you're playing the game itself, if literally just putting the figs on the table and having them go fight each other has a high level of complexity, then it's hard to bolt on more stuff before you just implode. Because you can't be thinking about 3 different objectives, scenario objectives, and like a secret objective, and what every unique piece of terrain that's magical and special does on the board, and some special scenario rules of how things are going to act and turns are going to resolve. Like, your brain just has a limit of things it can think about. Human brains just don't do well with more than like 4 or 5 things they can keep at the top of their head at once. It's just sort of an average. If you're not one of those people, if you can keep 10 things in your head simultaneously and give them your full attention, then this is not a selling point for you. The other thing I would say it does well is it sets up games where you can win by other than kill. And I wanted to mention this because I think this is one thing Ant, in his video, I strongly disagree with. Because he was saying, like, these things are just better. The problem is, that is still assuming the old calculation that the only way to win is to kill the enemy. And that's just simply not the case. Good scenarios should have win conditions in them. Not every one. There should be a kill scenario. But I stand behind this 100%. Good scenarios should have win conditions in them that are completely independent of killing. That I can win having one model left on the table, and I haven't removed a model from the enemy, and I can win completely. Not every scenario. There should also be a scenario that is murder each other, and the guy or girl with the most stuff on the table at the end is the winner. That is a very vital and important scenario, because that's also often the history of war, right? And so, like, not having that would be foolish. And so, in that scenario, I agree with Ant. You can find things that are winners, and they're just better. Period. Okay? So, to me, but you've got to have things that are like the person who has a model standing on this thing, or that casts this thing, or that rolls this die at this time in this place, moves this thing, runs these things off the table. There's 100,000 different examples. Wins. And to me, this is something that's always been very ingrained in me, because I've always loved Mordheim and spent a huge amount of time playing Mordheim, and so much of Mordheim is not about killing each other. All the best scenarios are about doing other stuff. So I'm already naturally prone to that. If you prefer a more pitched battle situation where it's just sort of kill on kill, and all you need is kill, then this isn't going to be a win for you. It's just going to whiff. All right, the last one is probably of my what it does well is probably the most controversial. I think Age of Sigmar does structure really well, and that's going to be controversial. But let me explain because I can hear you yelling at the screen. But it's okay, stay with me. There's no points and there's no rules for how you construct anything, right? And that means you don't have to remove anything to create structure. I'm going to get back to this later, but I want to touch on it now. One of the things Ant said is like, well, you could play other games, Kings or whatever, with just one model and go. No, you can't. Like, I strongly disagree. The reality is, yes, you can. He's right by truth. That is not a false statement. But you don't do it. And here's why. Removing rules from games is simply harder than adding them. Think about the last time you decided to cut major portions of the rules out of a game you're playing. Okay? You just don't tend to do it. Again, the psychology of human beings is that we tend to want to operate within the rule structures we are given in scenarios like this. So the idea of removing rules is somewhat anathema. And if the rules say you build your armies like this, you play with these points, you play in this way, you will just tend to do so. Moreover, even if you are okay with not doing that, you've got to then go out, and the other added complexity of a war game is you've got to go out and find other people who are willing to just strip all this stuff out, right? And play in a different way. And that can be very challenging. Whereas people are often more happy to add stuff to the world, right? Whether in everything from fan fiction to all the variants of Magic that existed. You know, Magic had a very straightforward structure, and people took that and built like 10 other games and ways to play, but from the early years to now, some of which have become codified. So, for example, like what was called EDH, Elder Dragon Highlander, eventually became, Commander or whatever, right? And it's now Wizard sells Commander boxes. But that was just some variant of the game that people added extra rules on, right? So people love throwing extra rules at stuff. Every time that we, that the TOs add stuff in their rules pack, that's adding extra rules. That they put in scenarios with additional points you gain from things, that's adding rules. We love adding rules. We hate taking them away. Okay? I just stand behind that. From watching, from 27 years of watching people play every type of game beyond war games, I've just seen the behavior. Right? So when the substructure is simple and has nothing you need to remove, you can just bolt on anything you like. And I think there are a lot of successful bolt-ons. South Coast GT, Clash, Scroll Systems, Azer, our own Mordheim rule set we developed, which I think plays really well. I have played a lot of games of it. I've gotten a lot of feedback from other people who've played and had a lot of fun. I would encourage Ant for you to go try that as well, by the way. I'll throw a link down to the Mordheim documents in case anybody's curious and wants to check out what we did for Mordheim AOS. It's a fun way to play a a smaller but more structured game. Okay, and I think if you're inclined, I think a very balanced version of the game. All right, so I think those are the things it does well. You may not agree with me, and that's okay. Again, all of this is from my point of view. But I think there's also many places where Age of Sigmar fails, and I want to talk about those, because they're serious, and if you're the type of person that really likes these things, this game isn't going to work for you. Alright, mass battle. Boy, is this a thing. And Ant mentioned this in his video, and I totally agree with him. There are games that do mass battle better. And I think he's right. You look at, like, Kings of War. You can, with, big diorama units, you don't pull figs. I love the structure of their game and the way that they handle mass battle. Now, there's a lot of mass battle games out there, especially in the historical setting and stuff like that. Age of Sigmar just falls down, I think, when you get into large battles. Because each unique war scroll adds complexity. So this is something he mentioned. And I think in broad terms, he's not wrong. Again, I don't think you need to know it all to start. But if you try to start with like 15 war scrolls and an equivalent number of units, whew, boy oh boy, I do not want it. Like your brain is going to melt, right? I just think big games become really difficult, and moreover, because of the free-flowing movement of the game and the way that it moves around, when you pack the board with figs and then there's also lots of terrain, it just suddenly becomes no tactics and everything just kind of slams into each other, and it becomes kind of a mess because everything just fights with everything all the time. So to me, it works better when you've got a lesser number of units. I'm not talking like a skirmish game, but a smaller number of units where you've got room to maneuver around, utilize the terrain, really get very tactical with the way that you move and act with your models, as opposed to just everybody's always charging everybody every round. Okay? And finally, and this is a huge point for me, moving that many models is a pain. Now, if you're a 40k player for years, and you played, like, Tyranids or something, right, this is probably a joke when people complain about this to you, because, you're used to moving around those little things, I don't remember what they're called, some kind of gaunt thing, and, yeah, it's your life, is moving a bunch of tiny models one by one, so, there you go. But for me, no bueno. Pass. Fine balance. And I mean that exactly the way I say it. I think you can play perfectly balanced versions of the game. But I have a high tolerance for that. A really high tolerance for that. I do not mind battles with a fair amount of inequity. Other people do not like that and want it as close to balanced as possible. Your tolerance for variation is yours and yours alone, and there's nothing wrong with having different tolerances to balance. And the reality is, even with those existing comps, which work perfectly well to my mind, so other people might look at that and go, it's just not good enough. And I would say, I get it. Because you're right, it doesn't have a sense of fine balance. It's just the reality. It is easy to have inequity in the game. There are ways you can fight this. In addition to the comps, having scenarios with alternate win cons and things like that is a big way that issue can be addressed, but it's always going to be there. It's never going to go away. So, I mean, again, you've got to find your tolerance level, right? Pickup games. I think this is a real challenge, ironically. Because even though it is simple to just start and to teach people, teaching people is different than a pickup game, right? Pickup game means I know how to play, you know how to play, and we just wander into each other at the game store. Now, I don't know how often this happens, because it only happens with a given person once, basically, right? After that, you can talk and come to a conclusion of how you want to do this going forward. But without conversation or, pre-agreed comps or just even a standardized environment where you know expectations, it can be very difficult to just have a sudden game. It's certainly not impossible, but it's definitely more difficult than, 2,500 points? Sure. Right? Like, that was the level of conversation of the old world we lived in. And it's just not that. Okay? It's just not that at all. Which is fine. I mean, again, your tolerance to these sorts of things are going to vary, but you're going to have a conversation. No doubt. And if you don't, as as South Park told us, it's pizzaing when you should have French fried, and you're going to have a bad time. And this is my final one for where it falls down, and I think it's maybe, again, the most ironic one, and that's traditional pitched battle. This is a screenshot from one of Luke Davis's battle reports. Good old Luke Davis, such a fine maker of battle reports. I hope he comes back and makes anything. I'll watch any of his battle reports in any system because I think they're great. But ironically, I think trying to play Age of Sigmar the way we've been playing the game, sort of traditional pitched battle, large numbers of models, line up and kill, I think the game just falls down. I think it doesn't play well in that situation. So if that is the experience you want, I would say it's not the game for you. Or at the very least, you're going to have to tolerate, a bunch of... you're going to have to tolerate everything else I just said, and sort of the fact that it is kind of a square peg in a round hole. Which is ironic, I suppose, that it is such a deviation from the tradition. But I do believe it to be the case that that this just isn't it's not its core competency, as Ant might say. So I think you have to be willing to shuffle up your expectations or have a different experience. And the reality is, if you're not interested in that, or it's just not what you like, again, it's no good. So what is the point, right? And that was one of the questions he asked. Like, what is the point, right? I think that what Age of Sigmar is, when I look at it, I see it as a foundation rather than a final game, right? It's made to be this small, simple, generic rule set you bolt your own fun onto. And I can hear people saying, I don't want to do that. That's stupid. A game should be playable out of the box. Well, I would push back on that and say, no, that doesn't have to be the case. This has been a fact of life in RPG design for decades. There is a host of very generic game systems out there that are more or less playable. I just made finger quotes. You can't see that because you just hear my voice, but there's finger quotes. Out of the book. These games all expect that you're going to add worlds, add additional rules, add expectations, deploy certain packs of the rules, buy additional books that give you the specifics for playing in an additional world. There's all sorts of things like that. So I'm just kind of bringing up some of those systems now. And they're all more or less generic. The final one is one I wrote, NGS, the Narrative Game System, which is a very open-ended game. And the reality is the rules of that game are nothing on their own. The rules don't do much at all. It relies on a lot of other things happening, a lot of other decisions getting made by you, the game owner, the game player, to actually have the experience. Of course, we try to guide you and stuff like that and provide you with examples and all those sorts of things. But it very much is more a toolkit than a final product. And again, in the world of RPGs, this isn't weird. But here's the other thing I'll say. If your argument is, I don't want that. I want to be able to play out of the box. I want the game system. If you're not making a sort of objective statement that not having that is wrong, then I agree with you, because that's, again, simply a matter of the types of games you like. And these systems that I've listed aren't for everyone. There's plenty of role players out there who want to just be able to sort of open the book, look at the rules, pick a race, pick a class, pick some other choices, and go and have expectations about the world they're in, the people they can meet, the sort of total conception. But again, that's not everybody, and that's not every game, and that's okay. Having all of these different games, as I've said in previous videos, is a good thing. The wargames market was for the longest time one of the weirdest markets, because it was so hegemonic, right? There was one superpower, and everything else was just sort of crumbs. And the other sort of games, especially when you come to something like RPGs, even something like Dungeons and Dragons, which was massive for so long, has always had a lot of healthy competition that had big numbers of followers going back 20, 30 years. So I think more we're just catching up now. And the market has consistently gotten more and more healthy because of having all those options where people can find their own bliss. And I think it's good in the RPG world too. Because in the end, this is the point. The point is to have all the fun. And if looking at the positives that I listed, you think those are all things I would enjoy, and if you look at the negatives and go, I don't care about those things, then you're going to have a good time. But if the reverse is true, and you don't like those elements that I listed, or don't care about them, or don't agree with me that those are true, but you're very bothered by the things that I said are failings, then this game's going to be a miss for you. The idea is that there shouldn't be a one-size-fits-all. There's lots of different experiences. Have all the fun. Try a bunch of them. See how you like it. See what games appeal to you the most. That's the best thing I can say. So, there you go. That's my response to Ant and to his new channel, HR. I'll link to his original video down below. I hope you enjoyed this. Always remember to like it if you like it. And leave a comment down below on the points you think I made. Did I miss anything where it succeeds or fails? Obviously, I want to keep this discussion civil. This is all in good fun. I love Ant's the way he approaches topics, and I was happy to make this response. So let's have a fun conversation about it. I very much look forward to it. And as always, we'll see you next time.